In this episode, we start by treating privacy incident management as a discipline that protects people first and organizations second, because beginners often assume incidents are only a technical problem or only a legal problem. A privacy incident is any event where personal information is mishandled, exposed, accessed inappropriately, altered in a harmful way, or used outside the rules the organization promised to follow. Sometimes that happens through a cyber attack, but it can also happen through human error, a vendor mistake, a misconfigured system, or a process that silently fails over time. The CDPSE exam expects you to recognize that privacy incident management is about speed and correctness under uncertainty, and that the best outcomes come from having clear triggers, reliable evidence, and a remediation flow that keeps decisions defensible. When you are new, it helps to remember that incident management is not improvisation, because improvisation is how organizations lose track of what happened and accidentally cause more harm. The goal is to build a repeatable response that can scale from small mishandling events to major breaches, while keeping privacy obligations, communication needs, and operational reality aligned. By the end, you should be able to explain what triggers a privacy incident response, what evidence matters, and how remediation should move from containment to learning. A strong foundation for incident management is understanding the difference between a security incident and a privacy incident, because the exam often tests whether you can keep those concepts distinct while acknowledging their overlap. A security incident is usually framed around unauthorized access, disruption, or compromise of systems, while a privacy incident is framed around harm to individuals or violation of privacy obligations and expectations. Many events are both, such as when an attacker steals customer records, but some events are privacy incidents without being classic cyber attacks, like sending a report to the wrong recipient or using data for a new purpose without proper notice. Conversely, some security incidents may not involve personal information at all, like a denial of service against a public website, and those may not trigger privacy obligations even though they are serious. The reason this matters is that privacy incident management includes steps that security teams might not prioritize, such as assessing impact to individuals, determining notification obligations, and coordinating communications in ways that respect transparency expectations. Beginners sometimes assume the security team will handle everything, but privacy requires cross-functional coordination with governance owners, legal interpretation, communications planning, and operational teams that understand the data. The exam expects you to recognize that privacy incident response must be integrated with security response, but not replaced by it. Clear triggers are the starting point for effective privacy incident management, because without triggers, people hesitate, downplay issues, or fail to escalate until it is too late. A trigger is a defined condition that causes the organization to treat an event as an incident and begin a formal response process, even if details are still uncertain. Triggers can include confirmed or suspected unauthorized access to personal information, confirmed or suspected exposure through misconfiguration, loss of devices containing personal information, transmission of personal information to the wrong party, or discovery of processing outside approved purposes. Triggers can also include vendor notifications, because vendors may detect issues first, and contracts often require rapid vendor reporting. The exam may present scenarios where the right answer is to initiate incident response based on suspicion rather than waiting for proof, because waiting can destroy evidence and increase harm. Triggers should also consider sensitivity and volume, because exposure of highly sensitive personal information is likely to require faster escalation and more rigorous investigation than a small, low-risk mishandling. A well-designed trigger model reduces ambiguity for frontline staff, which is crucial because many incidents are discovered by people outside security teams. When triggers are clear, response begins sooner, and that is one of the most reliable predictors of better outcomes. Once triggers are defined, incident management depends on triage, which is the disciplined process of quickly understanding what happened well enough to choose the right next actions. Triage is not the same as full investigation, because in early moments you are trying to determine scope, severity, and urgency with limited information. From a privacy perspective, triage includes identifying what categories of personal information may be involved, what populations may be impacted, what systems and vendors are in scope, and what exposure pathways might exist. The exam expects you to see that triage must be cross-functional, because technical teams can identify system behavior, data owners can explain what the data means, and privacy governance owners can help interpret obligations and risk. A common beginner misunderstanding is thinking that triage is only about counting records, but privacy triage also includes assessing potential harm, such as identity theft risk, discrimination risk, or loss of trust. Another misunderstanding is assuming that if an event is small, it should be handled informally, but informal handling often leads to missing lessons and failing to build evidence that the organization acted responsibly. Triage should lead to a classification decision, such as whether the event is a privacy incident, and if so, what response level it requires. This classification then drives the pace, resources, and communication approach that follows. Evidence is the backbone of privacy incident management because evidence determines whether the organization can understand the event, make defensible decisions, and prove what it did afterward. Evidence includes technical artifacts like access logs, authentication records, configuration snapshots, system alerts, and data export records. But it also includes operational artifacts like support tickets, emails, vendor notifications, and internal decision notes. The exam will often test whether you appreciate that evidence must be preserved early, because evidence can be overwritten, deleted, or changed by normal system operations or by hurried remediation. Evidence preservation also protects the organization from making incorrect assumptions, such as blaming a user error when the real issue was a misconfigured access control. For privacy incidents, evidence must also support understanding what personal information was involved and how it relates to individuals, which requires data inventory knowledge and sometimes mapping of identifiers to real people. Beginners sometimes assume evidence is only for forensics, but in privacy work it is also for notification decisions, regulatory reporting, and internal accountability. Evidence must be handled carefully to avoid creating additional privacy exposure, because incident artifacts can contain personal information and access to evidence should be controlled. When you treat evidence as both the truth source and a privacy-sensitive asset, you align with how the exam expects a mature program to behave. An important part of evidence discipline is building a timeline, because privacy incident response often fails when teams cannot agree on what happened first, what changed, and when exposure occurred. A timeline allows teams to link technical events to business actions, such as a configuration change that opened access or a vendor deployment that introduced a bug. It also supports decisions about notification timing, because some obligations relate to discovery time, containment time, or confirmation time. The exam may test whether you understand that timelines are not only for large breaches, because even small incidents benefit from a clear sequence of events, especially when repeated issues suggest a systemic weakness. Timelines also help separate symptoms from causes, because the first thing noticed is not always the first thing that happened. For example, a spike in access logs might be noticed today, but the vulnerability that enabled it might have existed for weeks. Another beginner misunderstanding is thinking timelines are too slow to build during a crisis. But in reality, a lightweight timeline built early saves time later by reducing confusion. A good privacy incident timeline includes discovery, triage decisions, containment actions, evidence preservation steps, and communication milestones. When the incident closes, the timeline becomes part of the permanent record that supports learning and accountability. Containment and mitigation are often discussed together, but they serve different purposes, and the exam expects you to keep the flow clear. Containment is about stopping ongoing exposure or preventing additional harm, such as disabling a compromised account, closing a misconfigured access path, or pausing a data transfer to a vendor. Mitigation is about reducing the impact of what already happened, such as resetting credentials, providing guidance to impacted individuals, or monitoring for misuse of exposed data. In privacy incidents, containment must be balanced with evidence preservation, because acting too quickly can destroy logs or alter systems in ways that make later analysis impossible. This is why mature response plans include steps to capture key evidence before making changes when feasible, or to document changes precisely if immediate action is required. The exam may present choices where one option is to immediately fix the problem without recording anything, while another option includes coordinated containment with evidence capture, and the more mature option is usually correct. Another key point is that containment decisions should be informed by understanding what personal information is at risk, because the urgency and required actions differ for different data categories. For example, exposure of authentication tokens can require rapid action because it could enable further access, while exposure of a limited dataset may require a different response posture. A disciplined containment approach keeps the organization from creating chaos while trying to help. Notification and communication decisions are central in privacy incident management because they affect individuals, regulators, and trust, and the exam often tests how you approach these decisions under uncertainty. Not every incident requires external notification, but organizations must have a process to determine whether notification is required, and that process must be documented. From a privacy engineering standpoint, the notification decision depends on factors like the nature of the personal information, the likelihood of harm, whether the data was actually accessed or merely exposed, and what safeguards existed. The exam expects you to recognize that communications must be accurate, timely when required, and coordinated, because contradictory or speculative messaging can cause additional harm. A common beginner misunderstanding is thinking communication should be delayed until everything is known, but obligations and trust often require transparent updates, even as investigation continues. Another misunderstanding is thinking communication is only public relations, when in privacy incidents communication is a control that helps individuals protect themselves and helps regulators understand the organization's response. Communication planning must also consider internal audiences, because employees need guidance on what to do and what not to do while an incident is active. Vendor involvement complicates communication because vendors may hold key facts, and contracts should ensure cooperation. When notification is handled through a defensible process, the organization can explain its decisions and show that it acted responsibly. Remediation flow is where incident management becomes more than a one-time crisis response, because remediation is the path from immediate fixes to long-term prevention. Immediate remediation includes correcting the specific cause, such as fixing a configuration, updating access rules, or improving a validation step that prevented proper rights handling. Longer-term remediation includes addressing systemic weaknesses, such as unclear roles, missing training, weak vendor oversight, incomplete data inventories, or inadequate monitoring. The exam may test whether you recognize that remediation should be tracked and owned, because if no one is accountable for the follow-up work, the same incident will happen again. Remediation also includes updating documentation, such as incident response procedures, risk assessments, vendor requirements, and processing records, so the organization's privacy memory reflects what was learned. Another important aspect is verifying that remediation worked, which might involve monitoring for recurrence, reviewing access logs for the corrected system, or validating that new controls are operating as expected. Beginners sometimes assume that applying a patch or changing a setting ends the incident, but mature incident management treats that as the beginning of learning, not the end. Remediation is how the organization proves growth and reduces future risk. A privacy incident program also needs clear roles and handoffs, because incidents fail when everyone waits for someone else to act. The exam expects you to understand that incident response involves a coordination team that includes security responders, privacy governance owners, legal advisors, communications leads, data owners, and operational teams who can execute changes. Each role must know its responsibilities, such as who declares an incident, who approves notifications, who manages evidence, who communicates with vendors, and who tracks remediation tasks. Another essential handoff is between investigation and rights handling, because incidents often trigger questions from individuals about their data, and the organization must respond consistently without making incorrect claims. Handoffs must also be documented so the organization can show how decisions were made, which supports accountability during audits and after-action reviews. Beginners often think roles are obvious, but in real incidents, stress and uncertainty reveal gaps, such as unclear authority to approve public communication or unclear ownership of vendor escalation. A mature program anticipates those gaps and defines escalation paths in advance. The exam may reward answers that establish defined procedures and ownership rather than relying on informal coordination. When roles are clear, incident management becomes faster and less chaotic. Testing and preparedness are often overlooked by new learners, but they are essential for making triggers, evidence handling, and remediation flow work when a real incident occurs. If a plan has never been practiced, it will likely fail under pressure because people will not know where to find documents, who to call, or how to preserve evidence. Preparedness includes training relevant teams on what constitutes a privacy incident, how to report it, and what not to do, such as attempting to fix issues without recording evidence. It also includes tabletop exercises that simulate incidents involving vendors, rights requests, or cross-border data, because those scenarios reveal practical weaknesses. The exam often tests preparedness indirectly by asking what improvement would most reduce future incident risk, and strengthening process discipline and training is frequently a high-value answer. Preparedness also includes ensuring logging and monitoring are sufficient to support investigation, because without logs, the organization cannot confidently assess scope and harm. Another part is ensuring data inventories are current so responders can identify affected populations quickly. When preparedness is strong, the organization spends less time guessing and more time acting responsibly. This aligns with the exam's emphasis on repeatable, defensible processes rather than ad hoc reaction. Incident management also intersects with program metrics, because organizations need to know whether their incident capability is improving and where weaknesses persist. Useful measures include time to detect, time to triage, time to contain, time to decide on notification, and completion rate of remediation actions. The exam expects you to think about these measures as tools for improvement rather than as vanity numbers, because metrics should lead to better controls, better training, or better vendor oversight. If incidents repeatedly involve misdirected emails, that suggests process and training gaps. If incidents repeatedly involve misconfigurations, that suggests change management and technical control validation gaps. If incidents repeatedly involve delays in vendor response, that suggests contract and escalation gaps. Metrics also help leadership allocate resources and prioritize improvements, which is part of keeping the privacy program effective over time. Another key point is that incident records must be consistent so metrics are meaningful, which connects back to documentation quality. Beginners may feel uncomfortable with measurement, but measurement is how organizations learn systematically instead of relying on memory. When you treat incident management as a measurable capability, you reinforce accountability and continuous improvement. As we close, running privacy incident management with clear triggers, evidence, and remediation flow means building a disciplined response system that can operate under uncertainty while protecting individuals and meeting obligations. Clear triggers ensure incidents are recognized and escalated promptly, while triage provides an early understanding of scope, severity, and likely harm without waiting for perfect information. Evidence preservation and timeline building create the factual foundation for defensible decisions, including notification and communication choices that must be accurate and coordinated. Containment stops ongoing exposure, mitigation reduces impact, and both must be balanced with protecting evidence and avoiding additional privacy harm through careless handling of incident artifacts. Remediation flow turns crisis response into lasting improvement by assigning ownership, tracking corrective actions, updating documentation, and verifying that fixes actually work. Roles and handoffs keep response organized. Preparedness ensures the process functions under pressure, and metrics turn incidents into learning rather than repeated failure. The CDPSE exam rewards this domain because privacy engineering success depends on reliable, auditable processes when things go wrong, and the strongest programs are the ones that respond quickly, document clearly, and improve systematically after every event.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.